Story 1. When I was a child, I nearly got into a stranger's car to help him find his puppy. I did not go because my younger brother started crying. I thought he was very silly. Story 2. I slipped down a tidal bank when I was 4 and didn't know how to swim. I sank straight down that bank with a tremendous amount of fear, just still in the water, until I had an out-of-body experience where I saw my mother running down the beach to save me. I saw her running up to me until our bodies connected. There was a lady next to me whose leg I was pulling for help, but she was kicking me away. I remember my mother saying, "You bitch!" Until this day, 32 years later, I can ask my mother, "What did you say to that lady when I was drowning in Germany?" And every time she replies, "You bitch." I was 4. Story 3. Got folded up in one of those fold-up couch beds. It got stuck, and I was in there for 15 minutes. I was sweating badly, pinned in. I accepted death. It was at my friend's house, and we were about 12 years old. Luckily, his older sister came home, and they each grabbed a side and forced it open. Story 4. I am not allowed near a chainsaw. Years ago, my late husband was in a serious car accident. We had a fireplace and many large tree limbs waiting to be cut. My brother-in-law kept putting off helping, so I said I could do it. I have waist-length hair. I put it in a ponytail and tucked it into my shirt. I did fine. Next time, I forgot to tuck my hair into my shirt. My hair got caught in the chainsaw motor. The only thing that saved me was that I had so much hair the motor choked when the chainsaw was about 4 inches away from my neck. It is a self-imposed chainsaw ban because I was very careless, and I know I would not be so lucky again. Story 5. Reached into a spare switchboard space and touched the live 440-volt bus bar at the back because someone had removed the guard. Story 6. Holding a Swiffer sweeper handle above me outside during a thunderstorm to see if it would attract lightning. Nothing struck me, but it took one strike about 30 feet away to tell me, "What are you doing? That can and will kill you." I do not know why I was expecting to be like Thor with lightning coursing around me, looking all badass. Story 7. I was really drunk at Oktoberfest in Munich. We went on the roller coaster, and before sitting in it, I didn't remove my backpack. The attendant just closed the safety restraint over my shoulders. During a loop, I noticed it wasn't properly secured. I held it as tightly as I could. When we finished, the attendant looked at me and was completely shocked that it wasn't closed. It was a close call. Story 8. I was given a very severe wedgie and had to be rushed to the hospital. It was all captured on camera, and there are still photos. Story 9. I tried to catch an olive with my mouth. It went down the wrong way, and I choked on it. My father, the absolute hero, grabbed my legs and picked me up upside down. The olive came right out, so no Heimlich maneuver was necessary. Story 10. I stepped onto the road while busy talking, not realizing I was standing seconds from being hit by a bus. A random stranger grabbed my shirt and pulled me back onto the curb. The bus brushed against my hair as it drove past. The stranger just kept walking after casually saving my life. Story 11. Had my tonsils removed 2 years ago. The surgeon left my artery exposed at the back of my throat, causing a hemorrhage a few days later. The emergency specialist I saw initially said there was nothing wrong. However, the specialist I saw the next day said it should have been fixed the day before, or I could have bled out overnight. Story 12. I allowed myself to become morbidly obese with no exercise. My doctor told me I was going to have a heart attack any day. Thankfully, it shook me up, and since then, I have lost over 100 pounds. Story 13. My toast got stuck in the toaster. I had a metal knife in my hand. The toaster was still plugged in. Fortunately, my brain kicked into gear just before my knife made contact with the toaster. I think about that a lot. Story 14. Riding my bike down a mountain road, I wore the brake pads down to the metal. I hit a pile of horse manure and did a front flip, landing in a ditch full of poison ivy. Contact between the poison ivy and fresh abrasions caused a severe reaction that took the rest of the summer to heal. Story 15. Climbed up some train tracks that were 2 to 3 stories above rocks and a river while I was under the influence of drugs at age 19. I ended up peeking while hanging there, trying to pull myself up. If my ex had not been there to help me, I would have fallen. We spent almost 4 hours up there before coming back down. I now have a deep fear of heights. Story 16. I took many dual credit, advanced placement, and extra college classes my last year of high school. There was a program where each credit cost $75 at the local college while I was still in high school. I wanted to save money, so I signed up for everything I could. The problem was that during finals week, I had too many tests to study for at once. I spent days awake drinking only energy drinks, caffeine pills, and sugar. While doing my volunteer hours at the library, I tried talking to the librarian, but she could not understand what I was saying. I was sent to the nurse, who had to call an ambulance and my parents because my heart rate was dangerously high. I hardly remember what happened. It has been over a decade, and my dad still yells at me occasionally for drinking energy drinks. Story 17. In 1991, my father passed away. I was 19 years old, home on leave from the military. While going through his things, I found a handgun in his toolbox. I removed the magazine and, being young, grieving, and only a year into my military training, I assumed that made it safe. I looked at the gun, curious. I was not trying to hurt myself. I was just in a strange headspace, overwhelmed and not thinking clearly. I raised the gun, intending to pull the trigger, thinking it was unloaded. At the last second, something made me stop. Instead of pointing it at myself, I turned and aimed it at the garage wall. I pulled the trigger. It fired. There was a round chambered. I had no idea. I just stood there, completely shaken. The noise, the hole in the wall, the realization of how close I had come to an accident I would never have seen coming has stayed with me ever since. I have never told anyone this before, but it was a turning point that I will never forget. Story 18. Became unwell and did not address my fever of over 40 degrees Celsius for 3 days, heart rate of 140 beats per minute, oxygen saturation levels in the high 80s to low 90s, severe body pain, and exhaustion until I started losing time and seeing flashing lights. I called an ambulance and second-guessed that decision until I arrived at the hospital, where things moved quickly. Most of my right lung was not functioning, and I ended up in the intensive care unit for 4 days for respiratory support, hospitalized for a total of 2 weeks. Full recovery took months. Over a year later, I can only jog for 3 minutes at a time and still need to use salbutamol before and after cardiovascular exercise. This is a prime example of do what I say, not what I do. I would have sent anyone else to the emergency department or at least to a general practitioner significantly earlier. Story 19. I took a bite of a fried mozzarella stick but did not bite through the cheese and swallowed the first half. I had to pull the cheese out of my throat like a clown with a string of handkerchiefs. It was my 9th birthday, and we were eating at the restaurant where my mom and 2 aunts worked. All of their co-workers saw it happen and were horrified. Story 20. I lost my balance and accidentally grabbed an electric fence with both hands. It was incredibly painful, and I screamed because I physically could not let go. Thankfully, a friend was there to help me. Story 21. Not sure if I would have been killed, trafficked, or both. When I was in college, my best friend and I were in Florida for spring break. We got way too drunk one night, and I completely blacked out, so I have no memory of this. But apparently, while we were waiting for our Uber to pick us up, 2 formally dressed women approached us and tried to get us to go with them. They were overly friendly and petting my hair. One of them kept trying to take my purse and have me follow her. Thankfully, my friend was not as drunk as I was and sobered up quickly. They even tried to get into our Uber with us. I think about this often and what could have happened. Story 22. Walking through an unlocked door that led to a basement without a staircase, going straight to the basement floor. Story 23. Working out. Seems silly, right? Something healthy? I ended up getting rhabdomyolysis and was not going to go to the hospital. I did not know what was wrong, just that I was peeing red, which I thought was blood. It finally got to the point where my urine looked like coffee grounds. My kidney and liver were failing, and without aid, I would have died. 2 weeks in the hospital flushing my system out. Story 24. I was very sick with swine flu and called my fiancée at work to take me to the hospital around 9 a.m. I should have called emergency services because he worked late that day. He is my ex now. Story 25. At 11 years old, I stole my parents' Jeep with a friend to sneak out and meet some girls from our school who were also our age. The location was far out in the country, about 30 miles away. I hit a huge pothole that caused my foot to push down on the gas, accelerating us into a ditch and plowing straight through a barbed wire fence. I panicked and tried to turn back onto the road, but the turn was too sharp, and we flipped 3 times, landing upside down right in front of the girl's house. Thankfully, we were wearing our seatbelts and walked away with only a bloody hand and a headache. I imagine if we had GPS back then, it would have been funny to hear, "You have arrived." Once we landed. Story 26. Did not bother to shut the car bonnet or hood fully locked. For about 2 weeks, the bonnet flipped open onto the front windscreen while driving to work at 60 miles per hour in the middle of winter, driving to work in the dark. Story 27. Oh boy, a blowjob. Yes, you read that right. The guy had a cold combined with a cough. A few days after the event, I was in the hospital almost in septic shock. The doctor's explanation was that microbes traveled through my urethra, causing a severe infection. If I had been 1 hour later to the hospital, I would have been dead. Story 28. I was stung by a bee when I was a child. My mother took me to the hospital, and I started convulsing. The doctor told my mother that if she had waited 5 extra minutes, I would have died. People wonder why I am terrified of bees. Story 29. Almost overdosed because I mixed my sleeping pills with my very strong anxiety medication. I felt like I was falling through the floor the whole night and woke up bundled in thick winter clothes in the middle of summer. A few years later, I mixed chemicals while cleaning the bathroom. My roommate found me almost delirious, cleaning the same spot repeatedly. Story 30. Going down an expert ski slope as a beginner, I hit a rock and flew through the air. I came very close to hitting a tree and ended up with a severe concussion. Story 31. In the middle of the night, I was getting too comfortable eating a vegetable tray. I threw a piece of broccoli into my throat and started choking. I had to walk 2 rooms over to the bedroom to try to wake up my girlfriend, but by the time I got into the middle room, I had started blacking out. I fell onto the arm of my couch and dislodged it. I also broke a blood vessel in my eye. Story 32. I once tried cutting off a power meter box in a vacant house for a few dollars worth of scrap metal and got electrocuted. Story 33. A nurse at the hospital overdosed me on antibiotics before a very minor surgical procedure. I thought the syringe was abnormally large. After the procedure, my throat swelled, and I lost all ability to breathe on my own. The hospital somehow managed to cover up the incident enough that I could not obtain evidence to pursue legal action. Story 34. I nearly choked on Skittles. I was 8 years old and put a handful of Skittles in my mouth because I thought they would dissolve a little and I could swallow them all at once. I could not. They got stuck in my throat and I could not breathe. I used the last of my strength to drink a glass of water, which luckily helped me swallow the Skittles. Story 35. I was cycling back home after a late-night movie with headphones on. There was a railway track on the way, and the gate was shut. I decided to jump the gate. I felt a sudden rush of air right after stepping off the track. It was a train that could have hit me if I had been even 1/100th of a second slower. I did not put on the headphones for the rest of the cycling that night. Story 36. When I was 15 or 16, I worked at a bakery cafe. One day, a customer asked me if I could plug in his phone to charge it. He handed it to me along with the charging cable. I walked over to the first outlet I saw, which, as it turned out, was a high-voltage socket meant for industrial equipment. I did not realize that at the time. I plugged the phone in, and immediately there was a loud bang. My entire forearm turned black, the plug half exploded, and was completely destroyed. Luckily, the phone survived, and I was only left in shock. For a moment, I really thought I was going to blow up with it. Story 37. I ate a gas station egg sandwich which landed me in the intensive care unit with the nurse injecting but due to seizure and asphyxiation from a severe allergy. My tombstone would have said, taken by an egg sandwich. Story 38. My girlfriend cheated on me with my former best friend. I got drunk, sat on the windowsill of my third-level apartment, received a call, and the phone fell down. I tried to grab it, lost my grip, but somehow managed to hold on and pulled myself back into the apartment. Since then, I feel as if I died in a parallel universe. Story 39. I ran a red light on my bike because I saw no cars anywhere. The car that hit me was speeding, going 90 kilometers per hour at a 50 kilometers per hour speed limit. Story 40. Speeding to pass a car on the road, fully aware I will not make it because I do not have enough range. Story 41. I can hold my breath for a whole minute. As a kid, I used to mess around with my friends a lot. One particular friend would sneak up behind me when we were swimming, put me in a light chokehold, and drag me underwater to try to hold his breath longer than me. Stupid, I know. One time, he accidentally applied the chokehold a little too deep, and I passed out before going underwater. He had no idea and just kept holding me down there. Luckily, my other friend saw my eyes roll back before we went underwater and pulled him off me to bring me to the surface. I had a crazy experience while underwater, which I'm happy to discuss. Felt like eternity. I came to on my knees in the shallows, coughing up my lungs, and felt all the feeling return to my hands. I have done way dumber things and had more than a few near misses, but if my friend hadn't been there that day, I would have surely drowned. Story 42. I have worked with metal tools or bare hands near live electrical wires and contacts, thinking, I just need to avoid touching that. I always end up touching it. Last time, I melted some Christmas lights wiring because I tried to remove an annoying speaker they had in the box with all the connections while the lights were still plugged into the wall. I know I will do it again. Story 43. I took birth control. It turns out I have a genetic clotting disorder that makes me unable to break down clots at a normal speed. I ended up with clots throughout my right leg and both of my lungs. Story 44. I started choking on my own vomit when I was sick. If my parent had not been home that night, I would have died. Story 45. Suicide is a serious matter. It may not be funny, but if I had not left my abusive home, I would have done it immediately. Now, I have so much to live for. Story 46. My ex was driving recklessly for no reason. He was swerving, speeding, and dismissing my very real concerns of extreme tailgating in my car. You could not see the other car's tail lights, and he swerved to just miss the car that was about to hit us at high speed. But I was overreacting. I could just get insurance to pay for everything. I could just sue. It's not that big of a deal. You mean if I survived? Damn it. Story 47. I was wearing a Halloween costume with no armholes, which wouldn't have been authentic to have arms, and I fell backward down a staircase. Thank God my best friend saw it happen and grabbed me before I went headfirst down the flight. Story 48. I was 3 years old. I went feeding the ducks with my mom and baby sister. I threw the bread but forgot to let go, so I fell into the water. My earliest memory is my mom's hand coming down to pull me up. I also saw the duck's feet moving when I looked up before my mom got me. That was silly. I am 38 years old now. Story 49. I went and gave plasma to get some extra money for the holidays. I felt fine after leaving, but I started feeling weird when I got home. I was sitting on the toilet, and when I went to get up, I felt all the blood drain from my head and woke up lying on my bathroom floor in the dark. Because I was walking over to my sink, my forward motion threw me into the wall, and I had turned off the lights on my way down. Had I been any closer to the sink, I would have slammed my head into the counter and might have bled out before my roommate found me. I thought my roommate wasn't home at the time because she didn't comment on the loud thump when I hit the wall and floor. I asked her about it after I regained consciousness and was feeling better. She said, "Oh, I honestly thought the cat had knocked something over. I was wondering why I didn't hear you yell at her. So, my cat being a menace may have saved my life if I had actually slammed my head into the counter." Story 50. Thanksgiving 2014. I tried running a massive dust storm on an all-terrain vehicle and hit a 90-degree bank turn. I was launched 25 feet in the air. The people following me said I landed on my head and it split my helmet nearly in half. I didn't break a single bone, but I was concussed for nearly a year. I didn't remember most of my family or any events that took place for about 2 weeks after. I still don't remember that whole weekend, but many other memories since then have come back. Took a long time to recover from. Story 51. I jumped off a roof when I was 7 years old in the late 1970s, a very different time. My plan was to jump onto the roof of the shed, but I missed and landed between the shed and the backyard fence. I believe I had a guardian angel because I survived with only some scratches on my back. Story 52. Almost impaled myself sweeping stairs. I was using a broken broom that was lying around and was leaning over too far instead of just taking a step down. I fell forward and, by instinct, held onto the broom to catch myself. The sheared end was little more than an inch from my neck. For being broken and having haphazard bristles, it held my body weight. That is not an ideal way to be practicing shepherd's jumps. Story 53. I was 2 years old. I was at the pool with my mother, and she turned away for a second. I started drowning in the deep end. My grandfather happened to come by, noticed, and jumped in to save me. Story 54. A decade ago, I was a forklift operator at a warehouse. Another operator had broken the bands on a rack of lumber. The bands keep the individual pieces of wood together, but they had not fixed it. My boss asked me to remove the stack and reb in it, a very simple job. While I was lifting the stack, which was high above me, the lumber shifted because someone had left a pile of 2-inch rebar on top that was also not banded together. A few pieces of rebar fell on my forklift and could have easily impaled me. One piece took a chunk out of the seat cushion. This made a loud noise and happened in front of the general manager, who was very angry. I had to give human resources a debrief. I was found clear of wrongdoing, but every forklift operator had to do mandatory safety training. We also had to lower everything in the warehouse that was stored above 8 feet to check for loose items and safety issues. We found several. Story 55. My girlfriend at the time left me in the middle of the lake because her kayak flipped. I gave her mine, which was more like a paddleboard. I asked her to go slow so I could swim beside her. She just left me there. I started panicking because I got tired and my head was barely above the water. All I heard was my mom yelling at me to be quiet. I was drowning. My friend came to save me on a paddleboat after realizing I was in trouble. Needless to say, we broke up a week later. Story 56. Almost choked to death on a giant Jaffa lolly. I literally felt my spirit leaving this plane of existence until someone gave me the Heimlich maneuver. Was I a toddler? No. I was nearly 20. Story 57. At 15 years old, I went to Blackpool with a school friend, the guy who was driving, and his friend. I got very drunk and went swimming in the pitch black around 1 a.m. The water was much choppier than I expected, and I was pulled out to sea quite far. I am a strong swimmer, but I was really scared, worried about what might be in the water with me. I frantically tried to get out of the currents, so I had to swim along the shore rather than toward it. I was getting tired, my arms were aching, and I kept swallowing seawater. I really did not think I was going to make it. I genuinely thought I was going to die at age 15 drunk in the Irish Sea. Story 58. Electric shock from an old elevator, something like 100 to 120 volts, maybe more. Suffered tachycardia and almost died. Story 59. Not me, but a friend of mine. He died. He was walking along a river path. His foot caught a tree root. He tripped and fell headfirst over a cliff onto rocks. He died instantly. Story 60. The emergency room doctor thought I was drug-seeking and sent me home with laxatives. 24 hours later, my appendix ruptured. Story 61. One more. My family had just returned from the mall late at night. We were still walking to our house when my dad decided to buy cigarettes from a nearby store. The rest of us waited for him, including me. I was standing near a pole with my earphones on, zoning out. Suddenly, without thinking, my body started moving forward for no reason. I wasn't thinking anything. My body just moved on its own. Then, 3 seconds later, I heard a loud crash behind me. It turned out a motorcycle had hit the pole I had just been standing next to. The rider and his passenger were very drunk and were even laughing. My mom scolded them for almost killing me and said they were really irresponsible for driving while intoxicated. Story 62. Hike-in party. I go off to take a leak out of the campfire light, and somehow a bunch of people end up where I am. Someone starts shimmying up a pine tree, so I take this as a challenge naturally and shimmy up the nearest tree. It's a race to the top in the dark, like actual forest at night dark. Boom, crack. My body reverberates, and my drunk mind can't understand what's happening as I pitch backward with the top half of the tree on top of me. I know I'm falling and going to die because the landscape is all granite. This is the Ozarks, and the earth is jagged, uneven rock and hills and bluffs. I hit the ground still bare, hugging a broken tree, and I'm okay. No way. My head doesn't even hurt. My back is bruised. I'm bleeding a little but not much. I get up. I can move everything. I start to understand. It was almost pitch black, and I'm drunk, so I didn't realize I picked a dead tree. It might have been 30 feet tall, I don't really know. No way to see it all, but fairly small, and the trunk was narrow enough I could clasp my hands around it, I think. Once I got high enough, the rotten or hollow tree just snapped and fell on top of me. I looked in the morning. The trunk snapped like 15 feet up, which means I must have been at least that high, and I don't know how I didn't hit my head or spine on that landing. It looked like a death trap, but I hiked out with absolutely no problem. My back looked a little gnarly, but it was all just normal bruising, healed in another day or two. Oh, by the way, I won. I hooped that dude's ass. Fastest shimmying in Middle America. Retired. Story 63. One time I was cleaning my grill. I sneezed and hit my head on the side of the grill. I knocked myself out in the sun on a 95-degree Fahrenheit day. I woke up with severe sunburn and dehydration. Story 64. When I was a child, I ran onto the road to avoid getting hit by a giant purple exercise ball, only to end up being hit by a car instead. Story 65. Jumped out of a boat to help my brother collect my nephew. My nephew lost his swim shoe, so I swam past them to get it. I suddenly gassed out in the weirdest way. I am scuba certified. I swim laps. I am very confident in the water and can hold my breath for quite some time. I just couldn't. It was like I was too heavy, too weak, and needed too much air all at the same time. I started swimming back to the boat, but I couldn't keep my head above the water. My girlfriend spotted me and asked, "You good?" I tried to say nope and went under. My brother started swimming to me, and I remember sinking and thinking to myself, okay, you know drowning people drown people. You can't grab him, and I was okay with that. He somehow got my arm on a float, and it was enough to help me up. I got pulled into the back of the boat by my horrified family and puked myself back to life. I remember feeling very strange for like an hour afterward, like I wasn't real or had died and just slipped into another dimension. It was intense. All for a swim shoe. Story 66. Getting in a car with who I thought was a close friend of a very good friend. He was going to give me a ride home. He had been talking to my friend, laughing and joking. When I walked up to them, my friend introduced us. He was super friendly, cute, and he was driving a vintage red Mercedes sedan. Instead of turning right to get to my house, he sped forward, getting onto our crosstown freeway, headed to the boonies where he said we were going to make love. Freaking serial killer change in his demeanor and his eyes turned black and evil. He had to slow down to get off the freeway, and I went wild on him, scratching, kicking, screaming, whipping my backpack out his window, and spinning around 360 degrees like the Tasmanian devil. All I could think of was the criminal investigation panel on the Phil Donahue show. The head of the Special Victims Unit, before it was called the Special Victims Unit, couldn't emphasize enough. Don't ever let them take you to a second location. If they are transporting you away from where they grabbed you, you are almost guaranteed to be a victim of the vilest abuse, and more than likely you will be murdered. If they have a gun or a weapon to scare you into submission, I would think about calling their bluff. Another expert added, "That isn't necessarily recommended, or is it the best tactic?" And the first guy said something like, in all his years invested in abductions, sometimes death wasn't the worst thing that could happen to you during transport. You cooperate until he takes you to the second location, and you're as good as dead. That was the 1970s. I was a sophomore in high school. After going off on him, he had no choice but to pull over, and I jumped out of the car at a busy intersection, walking back to get my backpack. It had all my textbooks. My mom was going to kill me. While Good Samaritans got the description of the car and asked to use the phone to call the police at the mini-mart on the corner. No cell phones, no DNA. I believed 100% he would have killed me. I still had his hair tangled around my fingers, his skin under my fingernails. The local sheriff gave me a stern talking to and took me home. No report was ever made. The good old days when the blame fell on the victim. I knew better. Story 67. As a child, my neighbor and I often chased each other. We were 5 or 6 years old when he thought it would be funny to slam the door in my face. I stopped it with my hands, but I slit my wrist because the door was mainly made of glass. There was a lot of blood. In the hospital, they cleaned it up and you could see my main artery inside the wound. If anything had gone differently, it could have been severed. Story 68. I was 12, walking home from school on a very hot day. A man in a truck pulled over and told me to get in to give me a ride home. He looked like the type of person my dad would know, and I thought he might recognize me, so I got in. When I asked how he knew my dad, he said he had no idea who my dad was. My mind started racing, thinking I was going to end up on the news as a missing child. Thankfully, he was a good person who didn't want a child to maybe get heat stroke and dropped me off at home. In hindsight, it was incredibly foolish of me to just hop into a stranger's truck. Story 69. I was running a bit to twerk beside the pool. It was a pool party and my favorite music came on. Oh my God. I slipped and fell very hard. Story 70. I had pneumonia and a pleural effusion. The pain from the pleural effusion was so severe that I did not realize I had pneumonia. At first, I thought I had slept poorly or had been hurt during an intimate moment. The pain from the pleural effusion worsened, and finally, I decided to go to the hospital. The medical staff told me, "If we do not admit you, you could die." I spent 5 days in the hospital. I needed oxygen, and they almost placed me on a ventilator. Listen to your bodies, everyone. Story 71. Going on the Gauley River for Gauley Week, having never been whitewater rafting before, was amazing. Story 72. As a child, I put my head on the tracks to listen for a train. They usually came from one direction on the line. I could hear it but didn't see it. Then the crossing lights and bell came on. I was confused, and I saw people looking at me like I was crazy. I turned around just in time to see a train coming toward me from the direction they rarely came. It was less than 100 feet away, coming around the curve, and blew its horn as I looked right at it. I don't think I ever got up and ran so fast in my life. Young and foolish. Story 73. Eating alone at home while watching television, I laughed at a joke I made in my head and almost choked on my food. That is probably how I will die, choking on food while laughing at my own joke. Story 74. I went to a pool party at my boyfriend's house. Everyone there knew I couldn't swim or even manage to float in water. However, the other guys decided to flip me and my female friends into the water. Luckily, I was able to avoid it for a while. When I did get dunked, it caught me by surprise and I inhaled a lot of water. I struggled to get back up, coughing and having trouble breathing. My boyfriend realized this and stayed by my side until I felt better. Story 75. I was hiking by myself without telling anyone as an American tourist in Switzerland in my teens. I started climbing up a waterfall, slipped, and fell about 15 feet into the pool at the base of the waterfall. It was pretty deep, so I was fine. I was cold but fine. Of course, my head missed a large rock at the pool by less than a meter. This was not a trail. I was just exploring. Who knows if anyone would have ever found my body. Story 76. I was 19 and in college. I got really sick, coughing, feeling hot. I would wake up in a pool of sweat every morning. I thought I would just get over it on my own. I let this go on for about a week before my aunt made me go to the emergency room. I was so bad that the doctors were convinced I had tuberculosis. They asked me if I had been in contact with anyone who had it. They tested me for tuberculosis and also did an X-ray on my lungs right away. They concluded that I had a bad case of pneumonia. The doctor said that if I had been an elderly person, I would have died. Moral of the story: Go to the doctor if you are seriously ill. Story 77. When I was a teenager, a man offered me a job on the street. He said it was a serious job and I wanted to be self-sufficient. He made me walk with him until we reached a remote place. Using the excuse of giving me work clothes, he asked me to show him the size of my pants, which meant he saw a little of my underwear. Then he went to a house and came out a while later, telling me they were busy with another applicant. I came back shaking and half lost. At that time, phones did not have GPS or messaging apps. This is the first time I am sharing this. 20 years have passed, and I still have not forgotten. I feel that I had special protection, and nothing happened to me. Remembering it makes me want to cry. Story 78. Fainted on the toilet and cracked open my eyebrow. Home alone. That early morning bowel movement during your period that turns into severe cramps. Story 79. When I was a child, my friend's family took us to Venice and allowed us to explore the large arcade on the pier alone. I became separated from my friend, and a man tried to drag me to his car to buy Xbox games. I grabbed onto a machine and began yelling for help. A group of large men came by, tackled him, and helped me find my friend. The man managed to escape, and the police were not concerned, despite the many witnesses. Story 80. Driving at 80 miles per hour on a highway, which was the speed limit on a clear sky day, suddenly, the whole road turns to snow. Now I am sliding sideways at 80 miles per hour. I would have been very upset in the afterlife if I had died because the road randomly turned to snow. Idaho. Story 81. I threw a microwave into a dumpster. The power cord wrapped around my neck mid-flight and almost strangled me. Story 82. Maybe 25 years ago, I wanted to prove my mental toughness. I tried to hold my breath as long as possible underwater. I made it to 91 seconds but could have easily drowned. Story 83. Had a one-night stand with two random girls, and while making out at her place, I passed out because I was too drunk. They could have stolen my kidneys, and I couldn't have done much. It was my luck that the two girls were nice enough to just steal some of my money. I stopped having one-night stands and stopped drinking tequila. Story 84. Running down the hall in first grade with notebooks and pencils, I tripped and fell face first, screaming in pain. A pencil tip hit my sternum, dug in, hit bone, and broke off. Had it been 1 inch to the left, it would have gone through my chest and probably hit my heart. I still have a scar from that 45 years later. Story 85. I was mad at the world, so I flung my car into an 8-foot to 9-foot ditch. I was saved by a pipe and a rock, 2 points of contact only, suspended in the air. Story 86. I thought I was still fit enough to swim out to a floating platform in the ocean. I got tired midway but tried to push through, thinking I could rest when I got there and swim back. I got there eventually but couldn't lift myself up because my arms were too sore. The tide was pulling me down from the platform, and I was too tired to swim back. Thinking quickly, I grabbed the rope that tethered the platform and pulled myself back. I drank a bottle of tequila as soon as I got to shore. Story 87. Someone in the mechanical shop forgot to follow the standard operating procedure. This caused a red-hot chunk of metal to fly by my face, shaving my bangs. It left a shallow cut. It turns out the person neglected the detailed process that requires securing this part of the machine to the piece being worked on. That chunk of metal was embedded into the wall. Story 88. Drank concentrated coffee in Japan. Ended up consuming the equivalent of 10 cups of coffee in one go. Realistically, probably would not have died. But there was a good chance my heart would have had a very bad time. Vomited it up within 10 minutes of drinking it. No bad effects, luckily. Story 89. I was choking on water at the lunch table in middle school. Nobody around me noticed, but I was able to swallow it. It was definitely a scary moment for me. Story 90. Back in the late 1990s, I was taking apart a disposable camera because I was a curious kid. The flash was charged. I touched something and woke up on the floor feeling extremely odd. Electricity can be dangerous. Story 91. Slipped off the chairlift, not from full height, just as it was coming out of the bottom. The seats were really wet, but we were still alert. My dad tried to grab me and fell down on top of me. I was pretty winded after that. Story 92. Acidosis. Turns out not drinking or eating for 5 days due to vomiting and not going to the hospital for help until day 5 nearly finished me off at 19. Story 93. Walked in a part of Istanbul where we had no business being while walking to our hotel from Taksim Square. A taxi driver picked us up and scolded us for being in such a place at night. Story 94. About 4 years ago, I bit Lego plates, and a 1x6 brown smooth Lego plate got stuck in the back of my throat. I was upstairs struggling to breathe, but luckily, I managed to remove it. I still do it. Story 95. My dumbest near miss involved a kayaking trip and seriously misjudging a current. I thought I was being cautious, but ended up quickly drifting towards some rocks. Luckily, a local fisherman spotted me and pulled me to safety. It really made me think about how much we think we know versus what is actually happening, and how data can be a game changer. I have since become really interested in finding ways to analyze risk in different situations. Even just mentally running probabilities helps. Has anyone else ever realized they were way off in their assessment of a risky situation? Story 96. Rode in a car with a driver who had little common sense. He cut a lane change too closely and almost caused us to be hit by a semi-truck. My brother was in the car behind us, and he almost confronted the driver after we arrived at our destination. Story 97. I ate a whole bag of 5-week-old ham. Tasted normal and did not smell bad. I was rolling around on the bathroom floor the whole night. Story 98. I crossed the railroad crossing barriers while playing Pokemon Go and assumed trains would only come from one direction. Story 99. Using a manual push mower, I walked over a sewer drain cover in my backyard. Apparently, it was not seated correctly, and the lid flipped when I stepped on it. Thankfully, the lid stayed up and I only fell in with my left leg in the hole. The lid was also pinned under me, keeping me from falling in all the way, but it kept trapping my left leg. I couldn't yell for anyone as no one was around, but I somehow managed to balance everything and claw myself out. Story 100. Canoeing through a golf course, a river runs through one of the holes, and a ball missed my temple by a millimeter. Story 101. A month ago, I overfilled my gas cans and brought them into the shed. The heat caused them to expand and overflow all over the floor, creating a mess and fumes everywhere. I couldn't lift the cans to pour gas into a tank to empty them a bit. I had a battery-powered fuel pump to use but no battery, so I rigged my DeWalt battery to it. It sparked near the gas cans and spilled gas everywhere. Then I realized I almost blew myself and the shed up. Story 102. I was 9 and did not want to share any of my steak with my sister. She was notorious for trying to steal bites, even though she got in trouble every single time. I decided to cut her off at the pass by eating as quickly as I could. A piece got lodged in my throat, and I started to black out and was nearly purple before my dad was able to dislodge it. On the plus side, my sister never tried taking my food again. Story 103. A driver ran a stop sign and almost hit me while driving 50 miles per hour or more. I had to drop my bike to avoid a collision. He actually stopped, which I still can't believe. He was texting and was half drunk. Story 104. I do not know if this could have killed me. My first new home, and I was trying to install lighting fixtures, wall sconces. I did not shut off the main power when doing this, but maybe I wore rubber kitchen gloves. I remember a loud pop when fiddling with the wires behind the wall. I did not get hurt, but only then did I think to shut off the main electricity. Story 105. At the beach over a decade ago, I was overweight and intoxicated and challenged a far more fit friend to see who could swim to the pylon first. This was in the Chesapeake Bay in Virginia Beach and did not appear far at all. I used all my strength to get there and lost by a mile. My friend touched the pylon for a split second and did a Michael Phelps backflip to swim back like we were at an event and a gold medal was on the line. I had to grab hold of the pylon to catch my breath. Little did I realize, underneath the water, these pylons are covered in barnacles and shells, and it was like trying to cling to a telephone pole covered in slime and broken glass while being hit with a baseball bat by endless waves. I felt I had no choice but to swim back or I would bleed out. I got maybe 10 feet from the pylon and my arms and legs gave out. I always wondered how people could let themselves drown, and now I know. You can send all the signals to your arms and legs you want, and they just do not respond. I let out a desperate help in my most frantic female voice. I went under instantly and somehow, miraculously, I had swum far enough to a sandbar, extending my feet like a ballerina on her toes to hit the ground right before the water went above my lips, just below my mouth. I caught my breath and walked back to the beach on the sandbar filled with absolute shame as everyone was standing up and watching me. My wife never looked at me the same again, and I was divorced within a year. It amazes me how little I think about that event. What a lame way to have died. I am not even mad at my ex-wife. I would have left me if I could have, but no, I am forced to live with this. Story 106. I tried to kill a spider on my ceiling by throwing a shoe straight up. I lost sight of it mid-air, remembered gravity when it knocked me out cold, and I woke up an hour later with the spider still there, watching me like it won. Story 107. Not my memory, but according to my mother, when I was a toddler still crawling, I knocked a knife off the counter that barely missed my face. The rest is history. Story 108. I had severe tonsillitis for 3 weeks, requiring 2 rounds of antibiotics and steroids. A blood blister formed and burst on my tonsil because I cut it on a sourdough crust of a grilled cheese sandwich. To this day, my tonsil looks deflated and is half the size of the other. Story 109. I got on the wheel of a tractor as a kid for fun. I sat on the wheel, fell back, and cracked my head open on several rocks. I am pretty sure it is the only time I actually nearly died. My vision blacked in and out until it would not reappear, and then my mind was in a black void for what seemed like forever until I felt some sharp stings on my head. I think it was the doctors sewing me back up. I do not remember anything after that. Story 110. I got my knee stuck in my staircase railing because I wanted to see if it fit. I lived alone in a foreign country and did not have my phone nearby. Luckily, I managed to free myself. If I had not, I really think I would have just died there. Story 111. Carbon monoxide poisoning occurred when I used a charcoal grill indoors before bed. I was fully aware of the danger but had many rationalizations at the time. My wife and I should have died, but miraculously, we woke up due to severe headaches. I immediately realized what had happened and drove us to the hospital, where we received treatment and recovered with little to no adverse effects. Story 112. Went on an 8-hour train trip as a 9-year-old. My sister and I were between cars holding our arms out to feel the wind. I pulled my arm in just before a pole passed by. We had not seen the pole ahead, but it was close enough that if I had left my arm out 1 second longer, it could have come off. The scare almost killed me. Story 113. I found a pair of sunglasses on the side of the road after leaving a garage sale on a very busy road. I did not look up after picking them up and started to walk directly into the road as a car was passing going about 60 miles per hour. The driver swerved hard and honked, which made me realize what I was doing. Story 114. I was about 11 years old at a wedding reception. I had crushed ice in my mouth and laughed. I choked on the crushed ice while everyone looked horrified. Thankfully, it melted quickly and went down. Story 115. In 5th grade, a girl once threw the tip of a pencil eraser directly into my open mouth. I began choking, and nobody seemed to care at all. I was able to force it out after 10 to 15 seconds. If I had not managed to work it out on my own, I would have certainly choked to death at my desk. Story 116. I had a cyst near my tailbone, in the crease, and thought I could wait it out. It grew from the size of a pimple to infected in a couple of days. I couldn't even sit. The only way to ease the pain was to sit in the tub with the water as hot as possible, and as soon as I got out, the pain increased to an 11 out of 10. The antibiotics that the urgent care clinic gave me did not help, and it turned out that I had sepsis. At the emergency room, we had to wait 8 hours before I could be taken to a room. I had to lie across some chairs because sitting was impossible. Initially, they said surgery would be delayed by another 12 hours, but about 10 minutes later, they returned and said I was being moved to the front of the line. After surgery, I was left with a large open wound because they did not sew it shut. It needed to be repacked twice a day. The hospital was supposed to provide a nurse to assist with this, but they never did. I almost died again from a secondary infection. Now I need to be careful because I am told it is easier to develop sepsis if my body has had it before. During this time, I felt drunk and sleepy, similar to being extremely intoxicated and about to fall asleep. It turns out that this was my body's way of trying to survive. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.